All of the queries in Access are stored in a common programming language called SQL. SQL, or Structured Query Language, is a powerful way to write queries, but can be a bit difficult to read or troubleshoot. Luckily for us, Access provides a graphical interface to creating our queries that eliminates much of the tedium involved with reading straight SQL code. This mode is called the Query Design View. Let's take a look at the various areas of the design interface and how we can begin to build queries using simple mouse commands. Let's go ahead and recreate the customer email with region query that we made in the last movie through the wizard using the design interface. To do that, I'm going to go to the Create tab, and in the Queries group, I'm going to choose Query Design. That's going to move us into Query Design View. And the first thing that we get is this window that says Show Table. Here we get to choose which tables we want to be involved in our query design. From a Queries Tables section here, I can go ahead and choose Customers, press Add, and that'll add the Customers table to the grid behind. Next, I want to include information about my regions, and that comes from the States table. So I'll select States, and I can either press the Add button or just simply double-click. These are the two tables that are involved in this particular query. When I'm done, I can close the Show Table window pressing the Close button here, or the X in the upper right-hand corner. The Query Design Grid is split into two regions. We have this upper region at the top, called the Table pane. This is where the tables will appear that are involved in our query. Here I can see the Customers table and the States table. I can also see how they're related to each other. For instance, I have this join line that joins the two together. I can rearrange these tables however I want just by dragging on their title bars here, or rearranging them by dragging on the edges to make them a little bit wider so I can see all the fields within each of the tables. Now I can see that the Customers table and the States table are related based off of the States field here and related to state abbreviation in the States table. The bottom half of the query design environment is the Query Design Grid. These represent all of the columns that will appear in my query's record set when I run it. Now all I need to do to design my query is to choose which fields I want from each of these tables up above and move them into the grid below. There's a couple of ways I can do that. First, in this query, I want to find out information about my customers' names, their email addresses, and the regions that they're from. To add fields down below, I can either click and drag. For instance, I'll find first name from the customers table, click, and drag it down here into this first column, where it'll appear. I can also simply double-click. So for instance, last name, I'll double-click, and that moves down into the second column here. A third way of doing it is to simply use the design grid down below. For instance, in this third column, I'll choose the email address. I can use this drop-down list here and choose customers.email, which will populate the customers table and the email address field. I find double-clicking to be the easiest option. So in the States table, I'm just going to double-click on division name to add that to column number 4. In this grid section down below, we can provide some manipulations if we need to. For instance, if I wanted to rearrange these columns, I simply click. At the very top of the column, there's a very tiny gray bar, and when I hover, I'll get this downward-pointing black arrow. If I click, that'll highlight the whole column. Then I can simply click and drag to move the columns left or right. For instance, I can move division name between first name and last name. I'll go ahead and click and drag it back to the end. If I need to resize the columns, I can simply click on the bar between two columns at the very top here. I'll get this double-headed arrow, and I can click and drag to resize my columns. This will help me see more of the field name if I need to. For instance, if I have particularly long field names, or when we start doing calculations up here. Next, we can resize how much area is devoted to the table pane at the top versus the design grid on the bottom. I can click this bar here in the middle and drag it up or down as needed. Each of these sections also have independent scroll bars. You can see I have a horizontal scroll bar here that'll affect the table pane up above, and I have a vertical scroll bar for that as well. I also have a separate horizontal scroll bar for the design grid down below. Now, one of the things that happens to a lot of people is that they'll accidentally click in the scroll bar area. For instance, if I go to this one here and just click, you'll see that it scrolls off of my table pane, and it looks like my tables have disappeared. Sometimes when that happens, people will instantly go, okay, I need to re-add my tables. In order to add tables, we would open up that Show Table window again. I press Show Table, and that pops up, and if I try adding these tables again, you'll notice that they'll get appended with this _1. Anytime you see this _1 character here, that indicates that I've already got an instance of this table somewhere in the grid, and most likely it's because I've just scrolled away from it. In order to get rid of a table, all I need to do is right-click on it and say Remove Table. Now if I scroll back to the beginning, I can see all of my customer and states tables right where I left them. So that's how we can add or remove tables by opening up the Show Table window or simply right-clicking and saying Remove Table. But what happens if I add too many fields down below? For instance, if I added division name twice. Well, in order to get rid of it, I can either right-click on that field and say Cut, or I can come up to the ribbon up here and say Delete Column. Now my query is designed, and it's time to see the results. I have a section of the ribbon called Results, and I have two options here. I can either change my view, or I can press the Run button. For most of the queries that we create in this course, they're going to be select queries, in which case viewing the datasheet and running the query will be exactly the same. I can either change my datasheet view here, or run the query here. Let's go ahead and press Run Query to see the results. I can see the results of my first name, last name, and email fields that are coming from the Customers table, and the division name that's coming from the States table. If I want to go back into Design View, I can either right-click on the title bar here and choose Design View, or I can go to the View menu here and press this icon here with the little tools. I can also press the downward pointing arrow on the View menu to switch between Datasheet View, Design View, and if I wanted to see the code behind the scenes, I could change into SQL View. Let's go ahead and change my view back into Design View. So while the wizard will often be able to quickly create very simple queries within our database, it really only scratches the surface of what's possible in the Query Design view. For more complex tasks, or to troubleshoot and modify your queries, the design interface will be your go-to tool. As we'll see throughout this title, the design interface allows us to visualize how our queries are constructed, which minimizes entry errors and gives us greater control over our query record sets.